Number 10. Emma Frost learns her Hellions fate. During the time when Emma Frost led the Hellions, many of them ultimately ended up dead when caught in a battle with Trevor Fitzroy and his Sentinels. Emma herself ended up in a psychic coma, and issues later in issue 311 of X-Men when she awoke, she ended up swapping bodies with Iceman. So it's important to note that for pretty much all of this story arc, she does look like Iceman because she's in his body, so don't let that confuse you. Emma struggled with the revelation that the Hellions had been killed while in her care. Anytime Emma faces losing a student or child in her charge, it's pretty much the most sad in comics. Emma may be a lot of things, sometimes a hero, sometimes a villain, but the fact remains that she is a great teacher who very much cares for the children she looks after and trains. Number 9. Spider-Man Reign. Pretty much this entire limited series is depressing. I don't think I actually cried when reading it, but I definitely was severely bummed out by it. And if you haven't read it, be prepared to get bummed if you do. In Spider-Man Reign, we get to see a much older and much more senile Peter Parker. This version of him has less hope and is now retired from being Spider-Man. He works as a florist and struggles even to get that right, and he's lost MJ. And he kind of lost MJ as a result of his own involvement with her. I'm not gonna get into it because I don't think I can even say it on YouTube, but basically he's the reason that MJ died. Even when he tries to resurface to save the city from re-emerging villains and the police state that it has become, he struggles and gets his butt whooped a lot. And I mean a lot. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are enjoying this super sad list, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. The Origin of Somnus. This one is sad in kind of like a happy way. It's like, it just pulls on your heartstrings. In the Marvel Voices Pride issue, we got maybe one of the sweetest Akihiro aka Daken stories ever. Akihiro decides that there is someone who passed away recently, a mutant, who deserves a second shot at life in Krakoa, a second chance to truly be seen and be happy. That is Carl Valentino. Carl's mutant power allows him to control dreams, an oneromancer, meaning that Carl and Daken's one night stand actually felt like a lifetime to Akihiro, a lifetime they spent together, and in the dream they were happy. It was a dream that Akihiro says he never knew he wanted, but it was too much for him inevitably at the time, so he ran. Carl lived out his life while Daken raged on for decades. Because of the period that Carl grew up in, he was unable to really reveal his true self, or to feel like he could reveal his true self to those around him, to let them know that he was gay. So while his life was happy, Akihiro felt Carl had never really gotten a chance to live truthfully as the person that he actually was. Because of this, Daken has him resurrected on Krakoa and is actually there when he wakes up, excited to let Valentino know that he has a second chance. Proud that he can finally be who he always wanted to be, who he always was, Carl takes the mutant name Somnus. Number 7. The Punisher finishes the job. Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe has to be up there for one of the saddest endings to a comic of all time. In this comic, Punisher sets out to get revenge on all superheroes after his family is killed as part of collateral damage in a superhero battle. He fights and kills everyone within the Marvel Universe until it's down to just him and Daredevil. Daredevil holds back from killing his friend Frank Castle, hoping he can manage to talk him down, but eventually he's also killed by Frank. However, as he lays bleeding to death, Daredevil takes the opportunity to unmask, revealing his true identity to Frank, revealing himself to actually be his friend, Matt Murdock. He tells Frank of the importance of remembering that even superheroes have other lives, like he does, or did, saying that there's always someone under the mask, Frank, but you killed us all, with his dying breath, making Frank realize that in order to finish the job, he must also take out himself, as he too is a man hiding behind a less literal mask. Number 6. Death of Grills. Grills died in the David Aja and Matt Fraction Hawkeye series from 2012. If you don't know who Grills is, you'd really need to read the series to get attached and feel the feels of his death, but to give you a brief synopsis of why his death hurt so bad, Grills is Hawkeye's well-meaning neighbor and later tenant. And if you've watched the Disney Plus Hawkeye series, he's not a LARPer in this reality anyways. He lives in the same building as Hawkeye, aka Clint Barton, whom Grills always called Hawkeye. We get to know him as a friend of Clint's, whom he sometimes goes to for advice. He's kind, funny, and just an honest character. He also feels real, which is probably why it hurt so bad when he was killed by assassin and villain The Clown, who works for the Tracksuit Draculas, or did at the time in that series. Grills, no! Grills' death and the subsequent mourning of the character starts in issue number 10 and is felt onwards throughout Clint's narrative. Number 5. Death of Karen Page. I think Karen Page's death has to be one of the most tragic moments for Daredevil in the comics, and also for Karen, who, you know, dies. It all went down in issue number 5 of the 1998 Daredevil series. Karen and Matt had both had a rough go, and were finally managing to get their lives back in order. Matt had just recovered from the Born Again story arc where Daredevil's secret identity as Matt Murdock is revealed to Kingpin, and his life ends up being destroyed by Fisk. Karen, on the other hand, had just recovered from a drug addiction and got over being falsely accused of murder, managing to break into the world of radio and become a talk show host. So it was really heartbreaking when during a fight with Bullseye, Karen intercepted one of Daredevil's billy clubs that was taken by Bullseye and used as a weapon to target Matt. The blow by the billy club impaled Karen through her chest. Her dying words were to Matt as he cradled her in his arms, "I'll miss you." Oh, so sad. Poor Karen. Number 4. Destruction of Genosha. Probably one of the greatest tragedies to happen in the comics, especially in regards to the mutants, which you know, I'm quite fond of. During the E is for Extinction story arc in New X-Men issue 115, we saw Genosha decimated. This previous mutant island nation had a population of over 16 million mutants, but when Cassandra Nova unleashed her wild sentinels on the place, it was easily overwhelmed and completely destroyed. All the mutants pretty much ended up dead, and even with resurrection protocols in place on Krakoa now, it will take some time before we can ever get the numbers close to what it was and bring back all those fallen mutants that were lost, including children and, you know, whole families who were wiped out. It's actually the destruction of Genosha that brought out Emma's secondary mutation, her diamond form, making her one of the tragic, pretty much lone survivors of that attack, which we learn in the following issue. Poor Emma, jeez. Emma has had a rough time in the comics. Top 10 saddest things that happened to Emma Frost. Number 3. Disbanding of the Hellions. The 2020 Hellions series was such an interesting book. I fell in love with the idea of it when it was first announced, and we learned who our team would be, and then even more so when it was released and I began to read it. I also love how when that book was announced, everyone was like, I think pass. That sounds weird. And I was like, yay, Nanny! Give me Nanny and Orphan Maker. It quickly became one of my favorite X books, and I fell in love with the characters and their relationships with one another. So you can imagine how hard it was when I finally read the ending to Hellions in issue 18, making me emotional just thinking about it. Especially as the team disbanded and almost everyone ended up with a somewhat depressing ending. But that's the thing with the Hellions team. They're all characters still trying to find their place, and just as they thought they had found it, it was taken from them. In a land that they have been told is one of opportunity, where there is a place for all of them. Each team member now finds themselves at the ending somewhat lost upon wrapping up this story. It made sense. It was well written and well drawn and well produced, but it still broke my heart. As with many well written comedic pieces, it also ended up being one of the most poignant endings in books I have ever read. Number 2. Death of Spider-Man. The death of Spider-Man in the Ultimate Spider-Man comic. This one may have not happened in the main continuity, but Ultimate Spider-Man would become such an influential comic that it would actually go on to inspire a lot of what we saw in the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film trilogy. Peter Parker here dies when he is just a teenager while fighting to save the people he loves. During a final fight with Norman Osborn's Green Goblin, Spider-Man seemingly kills him by bashing him with a truck a few times, but unfortunately that vehicle explodes. Having already been put through the ringer, this ends up being Spider-Man's final fatal injury and final moment, or so it would seem. Aunt May manages to rush to his side, with Peter just having enough time to tell her that he did it. He finally did it. While he might not have been able to save his Uncle Ben, this time he was at least able to save his Aunt May. Of course, it would be revealed later on that Peter managed to survive due to him basically being immortal, but at the time readers didn't know about that yet, so this death felt very final and very emotional. Number 1. Farewell from the X Factor team. One of the saddest moments for me reading comics recently was the ending of the most recent X Factor series. And although the actual ending of that comic series was also bittersweet and brought a tear to my eyes, brought a few tears to my eyes, the most heart-wrenching part actually came from after the comic was finished with the farewell letters. The last few pages of that comic feature farewell letters from artist David Baldion and writer Leah Williams, and both made me cry profusely. Baldion talked about how hard it was to say goodbye to this book and to these characters, even more so than other book endings, which of course are always challenging. These were very much our kids, he writes. It very much felt like we were holding their hands during a journey of recovery, of acceptance, of rebirth. It's always hard. It was harder this time. And not only because we went deep with them, we could feel this story meant a lot to a lot of people out there. I'm going to miss my X Factor kids so much. I've come to know them so well that it honestly feels like some family member has left and is not around anymore. anymore. In saying her farewell, Williams shared what she felt the book and the whole world of Krakoa meant to the audience. Something became very clear to us all during the pandemic. The fact that as ex-writers, we were helping by giving readers a safe place to escape to in the form of Krakoa. That became my greatest wish in writing X Factor during the pandemic and all the turmoil of the past year. I wanted to give you all a safe place to retreat. I wanted you all to feel welcome in Krakoa and know that you belong here. She continues, I wanted you to feel the community and camaraderie that I feel with my peers, and know that without a doubt, you belong. I wanted to keep the gates open for you as long as I could. And I think that made me so emotional because for me, that's what the X-Men is all about. It's like you don't belong, but like finding a home and a family where you feel like you belong. It's like everyone that doesn't belong finding that place where they can be safe. And so just that revelation of that being what the comic was about broke my heart. Oh, so good.
Kicking off the list with number 10, What If the Juggernaut. Okay, to start this sad list, we got What If starring the Juggernaut. It was released in 1997, written by George Gonzalez, and we kick off in a world where Sentinels have already wiped out all superheroes. Great start. Plus there's this toxic gas that's filling up the atmosphere which will kill all of life. So things are beginning grim right off the bat, okay. And all that's left now at this point is just the Juggernaut. Now he's hunting down these Sentinels. He wants to die, but his own invulnerability won't let that happen. Kind of like Hulk the End, just a sad strong man in a world full of rubble. So he sees Iron Man's helmet, he sees Cyclops' cracked visor. He's just walking down horrible memory lane. Then he meets a couple of surviving mutants and they're not in good condition, mentally. I mean, they're actually blaming Juggernaut for killing the X-Men. And it all ends with Juggernaut knowing he's going to be the last living being on the planet and that it's his own damn fault. Number 9, what if Cable had destroyed the X-Men? Well, this one just sounds bad right off the hop. So after Professor X came back to Earth, the team was never going to be the same again. At this X-Men meeting, Xavier gets in a fight with Cable, and then all of a sudden it turns into Cable and his crew versus everybody, and it was just this big brawl. Now they escape, but later on, Cable kills Xavier, Jean, and Scott with a siren bomb. So now everybody's deciding on what to do with this guy. Wolverine's team wanted to kill him, and Storm's team wanted to bring him in. Both are pretty bad. So the Avengers have to step in and fight their battles while they're all working their own stuff out over there. So the Avengers are like, just do your thing, we're gonna go fight your bad guys, just wrap it up. But eventually Cable and his team is killed by Wolverine's team. Number 8, what if Wolverine battled Conan the Barbarian? Written by Glenn Herdling and released in 1990, what if Wolverine had battled Conan the Barbarian? So basically Conan and Wolverine switch dimensions. So we have Wolverine causing trouble in the Hyborian Age alongside Red Sonja, and Conan smashes Cyclops in the head with a rock, which causes the full fury of the Phoenix Force to be unleashed. So now this has caused a ripple effect, so the psychic rapport was shattered, and without Wolverine to hurl Colossus at her, there's nothing that prevents Jean Grey from transforming into her dark persona before she can destroy herself, resulting in the destruction of the entire universe. So just like that, Cyclops gets hit with a rock and then it all goes to shit. So yeah, crossovers are for sure fun, but you gotta look at the possible ways it could go poorly as well. Wolverine versus Conan the Barbarian is definitely one of those ways. Number 7, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? In this reality, Professor X is the one who becomes Juggernaut and gets buried. Now this causes him to go down a completely different path when it comes down to the X-Men, because after this, he never ended up creating the X-Men because he was stuck. So now the Fantastic Four wants to defeat Magneto instead. So Professor X, he's still listening. He's using his mind powers. He's knowing what's going on out there. He's kind of getting pissed that he's not able to go out and help. So he digs his way out, and his telepathy powers are now stronger than ever with his new Juggernaut super strength. So he takes over the country with his own X-Men posse to enforce these anti-human laws. So Cyclops even sided with Magneto at this point because he could block Xavier's telepathy. So they're battling it out on Asteroid M, and Cyclops is trying to remind Xavier about his original dream, you know, with humans and mutants living together in harmony. And before he could really consider it, the ground beneath him exploded and he got launched into space, probably forever, and man, that's gotta be boring. Imagine not dying in space. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. This should be number 1 maybe, I don't know. Number 6, what if the Hulk died and Kyra lived? Written by Greg Pak, released in 2007. Okay, so we start with the Hulk saving Kyra by throwing her out of the way of the explosion instead of the ship. So now the Hulk had died along with Crown City. And Kyra, she's pretty pissed, right? She takes all the old power from the planet and gets ready with her sights set on Earth. she's coming. First stop, of course, being the moon, where she defeats Black Bolt and then implants a obedience disc on him. So when Strange and Sentry come to the rescue, she makes Black Bolt use his sonic scream, which of course results in both of them dying. She's killing everybody fast, okay? So Heroim comes to stop her and says that basically if you kill everybody on Earth, nobody can honor your dead husband. So she says, fine, but you're gonna wish you were dead instead. And then it cuts to 21 years later and she's made all the remaining heroes build this massive Hulk statue. And when it's finally done, she walks onto the hand of the statue and then turns into stone, joining him. The end. Yeah, how sad is that? I mean, I feel like it wouldn't take those guys 21 years to build a statue. I mean, if they're getting paid by the hour, sure, then by all means, go for it. Number 5, what if the Avengers had never been? Written by Jim Shooter and Gil Kane, released in 1977, this was actually the first what if issue with a major death. So of course it has to be on the list somewhere. So we start off with the Hulk. Now this time he's not hitting, he's actually quitting. Now this caused the Avengers to dismantle. So Stark asked Rick Jones to find the Hulk, Thor went back to Asgard, and Jan and Hank went back to living as normal people. So Rick finds him, but he's now being held hostage from the Green Giant. So Stark swoops in and saves him, and they head back to the Avengers mansion. So Namor and the Hulk call out the Avengers, or rather what's left of them. So Iron Man makes a few iron suits for the others, and the suits, I mean, they aren't Tony Stark. They can't control these things nearly as well as he can. Unless you're in the movie Iron Man 3, then everyone can do that all of a sudden. So they stay in retirement. They're like, screw that, I don't want any part of that. So he's like, whatever. He powers up his own suit a little bit too much, and then he heads to the battle alone. He fights a bit, and then right when he's about to be ended, the rest show up. Jan, Hank, and Rick are back. Nice. So Tony is done at this point. His armor is weak, he's close to being finished off, so he uses his remaining power to regenerate Hank's armor. So the Hulk snaps out of it and goes after Namor, while the rest of our heroes mourn over a fallen Tony Stark, who sacrificed himself to save his team. Similar vibes to Endgame. A lot of feels in that one, okay? A lot of feels. A good number 5 feels train. Number 4, what if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glutt, released in 1977, we get to see a dream play out. Look, we've all probably wanted to be Spider-Man at one point or another. Of course, I mean, doing backflips and swinging downtown, that's gotta be the vibe. But of course, when it comes to stopping criminals and taking out supervillains, it's probably pretty stressful. So in this what if, we get to see this idea play out. We see other characters have a crack at the life of the web slinger, starting with Flash Thompson. And let's just say it's a lot harder than it looks. So we got Flash Thompson. Now after he gets bit, he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and he feels pretty good with his new given abilities, and he plays it out a bit. So he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling, maybe make some cash, which is a pretty good idea. I mean, you're a superhero, so you can definitely win most, if not all, fights. But he accidentally kills the guy. Sorry, oops. Then Betty Brant is now up with the powers. Okay, so let's see how she would do in the life. Well, her costume for starters is pretty badass. But when she runs out of web fluid while making TikToks, a thief runs by and gets away. And that thief, of course, being the one to take Uncle Ben's life. So far, so bad. Now finally, we have our third contender with the powers. John Jameson. While his outfit was also pretty good, he couldn't do the job like Peter, and he actually died while trying to prevent a space shuttle from crashing. I guess it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, to be fair, if something actually happened and it had webs, I really wouldn't know what to do. I would do a backflip and be like, is it fixed? No? It was cool though. Number 3. What if the Punisher killed Daredevil? We all know the Punisher as the guy who usually brutally kills criminals. See, with superheroes, those guys he likes to hit with a tranquilizer. But in this what if, we see Daredevil get hit with one of those tranq darts and fall off a building. So while Kingpin prepared for his next step now that he's out of the way, Spider-Man stepped in to deliver some justice on Frank Castle. So he finds the Punisher, and Punisher has no tranq darts left. So he shoots Spider-Man in the shoulder. It's messy, but not fatal, he says. He should survive unless he exerts himself, which he does. And his identity is then revealed. Then it cuts to Aunt May's house and she grabs a paper, reads the shocking headline, and then the house explodes from a missile launched from the Silvermane City. Boom, house gone. And then after a little while, Peter shows up in a hospital gown, ready to get some revenge on Frank. Peter does pretty well in the fight, so well he's actually just moments away from throwing the Punisher off of a building to his death. But the Punisher stalls and says he has info about his Aunt May, and this slows Peter down for just a split second, allowing for the Punisher to unload on Peter. God, imagine if they introduced Frank Castle in the MCU and then they immediately did something like this. Number 2, what if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Released in 1990, written by Richard Howell. Yeah, judging by this title alone, this one's a little sad. I figured we're already on the Spider-Man misfortune train, so I had to throw this one in next, you know? What if KRAVEN had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete patrolling the streets when he's suddenly trapped by KRAVEN in a net, and just like that, he unloads, killing Peter Parker. And of course, he eats a bunch of spiders and suits up himself to celebrate. Yeah, you eat a bunch of spiders, now you're Spider-Man. That's how it works. I think a human eats like, what, 7 spiders in a year when they're sleeping? So we have like, what, 7,000 to go? So now he's Spider-Man, just like that, cool. Meanwhile, MJ is like, where on earth is that Peter Parker guy? And then MJ is approached by a couple of thugs, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Only it's KRAVEN, but she doesn't know that. But she can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't recognize her, and he's way more brutal with taking out these thugs. So Cap, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what's up with the wall crawler. They did a decent job of wearing down the beast, but he needed more power. He ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? Comics are weird. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker, and that the Spider-Man is indeed not the same. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing about the news. She's messed up now for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public. The story ends with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter just can't catch a break, eh? Oh my God. And finally, number 1, the saddest of them all, what if Wolverine father? Written by Rob Williams, released in 2011, we start off with Wolverine taking out the Winter Soldier. And we see a world with Wolverine and Daken if they had spent their life growing together as father and son. So now we get to see what it would have been like if Logan was there for them the whole time. Now in this reality, they're named John. This life, however, was filled with repression and lies and led to John leaving his home and rising up as Daken, becoming the leader of the Japanese underworld. So Wolverine tried to save him, but because of the way he was raised with this version of Logan, he looked at him like a monster. He viewed himself as a monster too. This is the Muramasa blade, John, says Logan as he stabs him. Healing factors don't work on it. The issue ends with the boy dying beside his father, and Logan uses the same blade on himself. And that's the end. That's the end of the comic. Everyone dies, everyone's sad. That's what ifs for you, right there. Number 10, he created Carnage. With Venom, Let There Be Carnage releasing later on this year, we finally get to see Carnage on the big screen with Woody Harrelson set to play the mad Cletus Cassidy. So why not kick this list off with one of Venom's biggest mistakes, creating Carnage. When Eddie Brock was doing time at Rikers Island, his cellmate was none other than Cletus Cassidy, who was in there for horrible crimes. So when Venom came to break Eddie out of jail and reunite, part of the symbiote was left behind, and it ended up bonding with Cletus Cassidy. That plus the symbiote equals, well, Carnage. Absolutely. And we meet Carnage for the first time in comics with Amazing Spider-Man issue 361. In a list of sad moments in Venom's life, I think creating your archenemy is worth a mention. After all, his name may pop up again on this list, but that's for later. And before we continue on with some sad Venom moments, guys, if you could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up just to boost some morale. It's a sad video, we could use some thumbs up, brighten the mood a little bit. And if you haven't already subscribed, now would be a good time to do so as well. Just a little click, and then we're happy. That's it. It does wonders for the channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to some sad Venom times. Number 9, too many webs, too little time. It takes time getting used to your superpowers. I mean, to figure out the do's and the don'ts. Look at Scarlet Witch or the Hulk even, for example. Even having years of experience, things can still go south. In the comics, it doesn't take long for Venom to figure out webs are not unlimited. In the fabulous 300th issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, we see Venom's first swing at the spider life. He bonded with Spider-Man first, so when MJ meets the symbiote for the first time, she actually thinks that it's still Peter in his new black suit. He's similar to Spider-Man, only his webbing comes from his own symbiotic material. So when he shoots out the webs, he's really just shooting out himself. And eventually, he starts to run out of himself. He ends up falling to the ground, ending his first conflict with Spider-Man in a rather depressing way. Now, this isn't a video game, Eddie, so webbing is limited this time around. Number 8, clapped by the Hulk. When it comes to taking down the crazy Clintar, you can usually rely on fire to help settle the score, or its other main weakness, sound. Now, at the end of the movie Spider-Man 3, we saw Peter Parker figure this out. It matched the comics a lot with the bell tower, the symbiote being torn off Eddie Brock, all that jazz. But in Peter David's The Incredible Hulk vs. Venom, we see Hulk dish out a thunderous clap, so loud that Venom gets knocked right out. He gets clapped so hard that he throws up, which is pretty wild to me, considering just 4 pages before he took an undercut of a lifetime from the Hulk, yet that sound weakness is just too much to bear. Somebody tell Venom to never see a Slipknot concert ever. The guy wouldn't even make it past the openers. Number 7, snarky Tony Stark. In Iron Man issue 302, readers got to see a venomous blowout. Well, sort of. See, this is the time in the comics where Venom started to switch over to the good side. He started to become a part-time hero. This is after his truce with Spider-Man was made in Amazing Spider-Man 375. So he's going toe-to-toe with Stark now because, well, he doesn't like his company, he doesn't agree with how he runs things, the whole shebang. They're fighting, Stark switches over to ultrasound imaging because, you know, there was goop all over his mask and you couldn't see. But the ultrasound imaging was, of course, harmful to Venom. They just weren't a fan. So as you're reading this, you would think, okay, this is how he stops him. Some cool tech, checks out. Wrong. See, Stark actually roasts Venom so hard that he stops fighting. He insults him, he makes him feel so bad with his words. He straight up shames him. He's like, oh, you want to confront evil? Well, how about you take a good look in the mirror, pal? 6. Unfortunate Fortunato. Losing a battle is all part of the fun as well. So Venom got shamed so hard that he backed into a cave. When you're defeated, you gotta come up with a new plan. It's part of the gig. But sometimes when Venom loses these battles with Spider-Man, he doesn't take it very well. Like Angelo Fortunato. Back in 2005, Marvel wanted to reboot Venom, so the new Venom host was Don Fortunato. And in his story, he won the symbiote in an auction. He gave the suit to his son Angelo in attempts to toughen him up. I mean, sure, paintball would have sufficed, but sure, super suit it is. Eddie warned Angelo about the risks of doing this, but Angelo didn't listen. He ignored Eddie and then attacked Spider-Man anyways. He fought him, he ripped out Spider-Man's heart, and then he realized it's not actually Spider-Man. Rather, it was an imposter all along. So you would think that would be the end of it. That's pretty harsh enough. That could probably be a list point by itself. But when the real Spider-Man came in, Angelo didn't stand a chance. He was getting whooped. He was getting whooped so hard that he left. He just ran away from the problem. And maybe Eddie was right, okay, fair. But Venom wasn't a fan of this idea. The whole running away from a fight thing didn't sit well with him. So he abandoned his host mid-air. No, he didn't order him an Uber. He didn't drop him off at a Burger King. He was like, "Yeet now, bye, see ya." Spider-Man would have saved him, but his gear wasn't working properly after the fight that Angelo had just caused. You played yourself. Number 5, the Savage Six. The Crime Master has been a Spider-Man villain since the Amazing Spider-Man issue 11, and in 2012 he gathered his own team of villains called the Savage Six. It consisted of Death Adder, the Human Fly, Jack-o'-lantern, Megatack, and Toxin. Now, Crime Master forcefully bonded Eddie with the Toxin symbiote, and then the team targeted all those that Venom cared about. And then in the very next issue, they go after Betty Brant, with Jack-o'-lantern first up to bat. Next, the team sets their sights on Betty's family. The Human Fly was actually seconds away from eating Betty's mother. It's horrible. And then in part 4, it's revealed that the Crime Master was actually Betty Brant's brother, and Betty was forced to deal with him the hard way. Poor Eddie, and also poor Betty. Poor Eddie and Betty. This is a lose-lose for both parties involved. Number 4, bonding with Anne Weying. Anne first met Eddie Brock at Empire State University. She made her comic debut back in Amazing Spider-Man 375. She's a wonderful lady. She reflects on how once upon a time, her and Eddie were in love because, well, he was smart, witty, and he had a boyish charm that swept her off her feet. Sounds magical. But we're in a list of sad Venom moments, so it's about to change. Sorry. While they were married, Eddie became a journalist for the Daily Globe. Now, this happened while she was a lawyer. After she divorced him, you know, which is fine because sometimes things don't work out, things only got worse for her. She was shot by the villain Sin Eater, so Eddie figured it was a good idea to loan her some of the symbiote stuff, you know, to help heal her. Now, it worked, but the only downside is now we have another Venom. It's not that easy. You can't just put some goop on someone, heal them up, and then bring it back without consequences. So now we have another Venom. Now we have She-Venom. Anne ended up taking the lives of 2 men who attacked her, so although the symbiote returned to Eddie, she still has to live with all of those memories during that time. And she was traumatized until the end of her life. She couldn't even leave her own apartment. That's how bad it was. Even for such a short amount of time, Venom can cause quite the stress. Number 3, tortured by Carnage. So remember that Carnage guy that I mentioned at the beginning of this list? Well, in Web of Spider-Man issue 103, which is part of the Maximum Carnage storyline, Cletus Cassidy straight up tortures Venom. He chains him up over top of a fire, which we know doesn't mix too well with symbiotes, and he also shot at him with a sonic gun. So that's 2 weaknesses right there, boom. It's not looking good. Now, it's one thing to be attacked by your greatest enemy, but when they know your weak points because you are the reason they exist, that's a whole new level of pain. It's painful and personal. Carnage is just the worst. Number 2, he was fired. Perhaps one of the most saddest moments is when Eddie and the symbiote first met. And it happened to be on one of the worst days of Eddie's life. He had just been fired by J. Jonah Jameson for making Spider-Man out to look like a thief. So with his journalism career now over, he goes to Our Lady of Saints Church, asks for forgiveness, and while he was there at his arguably lowest moment in life, That's when Venom just had to come along. To think that all this started because of a mistake that Eddie made with his job is just arguably the most sad point of all of them. The hatred for Peter plus the symbiote's hatred for Spider-Man, I mean, this was the world's best timing. A match made in heaven. Or a church rather. Close enough. And number 1, his childhood. What's a villain without a sad origin story? Before the symbiote even came in contact with Eddie, his sad days were already well upon him. He grew up without a mother. She sadly didn't survive when she had Eddie, and his father, Carl Brock, resented Eddie for this, which is awful. What a terrible way to grow up. Nobody should have to experience that, let alone feel guilt for that afterwards as well. That's horrible. But Eddie was doing great in school. He was actually really trying to earn his father's love growing up. And in order to make friends, Eddie would often find things that were lost. So he would steal things and then return them just to make a friend. That's how bad this guy's life was. Poor Eddie. And then when he was a teenager, his bad luck grew immensely. He took his father's car and snuck out for a night in the town. And when he was on his way home, he accidentally hit his neighbor's son. Now his father ordered him to plead innocence, although Eddie's guilt was at an all-time high. He ended up pleading not guilty, but in doing so, it bankrupted his father and it ruined his reputation at the same time. That on top of Eddie's already horrible childhood, I can't imagine. This is a terrible origin story. No wonder the symbiote consumed him. Poor kid.